All right, so we finally got the results coming out of Brazil on that election that we have been talking about for months now between the far-right fascist candidate Jair Bolsonaro, the current president of Brazil, going up against the left-wing candidate Lula da Silva and the former president of Brazil. And I got a breakdown here from Al Jazeera in terms of what the actual results were and how this actually happened and what this means going forward. But obviously, off the bat, Lula da Silva did not end up pulling this off in the first round victory as some pollsters thought that he would. It is going to be going to a second round runoff now, where I would still bet on Lula da Silva ending up winning, but definitely a little bit of a disappointment that he didn't actually pull this off in the first round. He needed to get roughly above 50% in order to have that walk-off dub, but instead he ended up just a couple percentage points short of that mark, and we are going to be heading for this October 30th runoff election between him and, again, Bolsonaro. So here from Al Jazeera, they say unpacking the results of Brazil's heated election. So they say the first round of voting in Brazil's presidential election has failed to yield an outright winner, leading to a runoff on October 30th. They say leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, popularly known as Lula, went into election day on Sunday as the projected frontrunner, with recent opinion polls giving him a commanding lead over far-right President Jair Bolsonaro and even a first-round victory. So I'm going to give a sincere fuck you to all of the pollsters who had my hopes up that this was going to just be an absolute clobbering. It was significantly closer than I thought it would be, that most of the pollsters thought that it would be, and just in terms of the polling that was leading up to this, it wasn't just on the presidential race that the pollsters seemingly got this wildly wrong, but it was also even more dramatic in terms of their errors on the lower level elections, or the down ballot elections within the lower house and the Senate. So we're going to get to a little bit of the details there, but here they say that Lula, a former president credited with building an extensive social welfare program during his 8-year tenure, starting in 2003, obtained 48.4% of the valid votes. So again, roughly like 1.6% off of the 50% that he needed in order to win this outright on the first election. Now, I mean, maybe that's the difference of like a couple million votes here or there, but even the fact that it was this close to me is massively surprising, considering that, who Jair Bolsonaro is as the current president. But they say that he obviously fell short of the overall majority that he needed to avoid the runoff, and for his part, Bolsonaro got 43.2% according to Brazil's electoral authority, significantly outperforming pollsters' predictions that saw him at a 14-point disadvantage. So again, the polling data at the presidential level here was showing a 14-point lead for Lula da Silva, and yet he only ended up winning by like roughly 5%. Okay, so it's still a pretty sizable lead just in and of itself, but compared to what we were expecting out of this election, definitely Bolsonaro significantly overperformed. But they say here's what to know about Brazil's presidential race after this vote took place. So they say that Bolsonaro's support is far from collapsing. They say Bolsonaro received 6.1 million votes fewer than his main opponent, but his Liberal Party will surpass Lula's Workers' Party to become the biggest in the Senate. So this is going to be something that, should Lula da Silva inevitably win this at the end of this month, he's going to have to be dealing with a significantly more right-wing Senate and lower house as a result of these elections, which is obviously going to make it much more difficult for him to actually implement a lot of the policies that he wants to. But they say that the far-right firebrand and his right-wing allies won 19 of the 27 seats up for grabs in the Senate, and initial returns suggested a strong showing for his base in the lower house, limiting Lula's room again for maneuvering if he does win the presidency. They say among the notable winners in the lower house were Bolsonaro's former health minister, a general who oversaw the pandemic's troubled management. That is quite a way to put it, because Brazil has pretty much been the only other country on the face of the planet that has even come close to handling COVID or mishandling COVID as badly as the United States did. I mean, Jair Bolsonaro personally, I think he got COVID like at least 3 times. He's been hospitalized a bunch of different times for even other things as well over the last couple of years. And I mean, this is a guy who like basically came out and said like, suck it up, you guys are being a bunch of sissies for caring about COVID. We just need to get back to normal. Who cares how many people die? I mean, I think there's like a literal quote of him saying like, people die all the time. Everybody's going to die one day. So, who cares about COVID? So his handling of the pandemic, while there are many other critiques in terms of like how other people have handled it around the world, his was pretty much like a sole outlier there, even relative to the United States. But apparently the guy who oversaw their handling of the pandemic actually ended up winning his seat, which I think says a lot about the current political climate in Brazil. But they say his former environment minister, who resigned in the midst of an investigation into whether he had aided the export of illegally cut timber from the Amazon, also won his election. Okay, so you have somebody who oversaw just an absolute disastrous handling of COVID, won their election in the lower house, and you also had a guy who was basically involved in a corruption scandal surrounding the ongoing destruction of the Amazon, which is another massive reason why this election is going to be so important, because Jair Bolsonaro has basically like opened up the floodgates in terms of destroying the Amazon rainforest, right? Giving a lot of people basically carte blanche to go and cut down as many trees as they want. There have been like record amounts of fires within the Amazon. We just got this story last year that I covered on this channel back in July of 2021, that the Amazon rainforest is now emitting more carbon dioxide than it is absorbing. So if you guys don't know, the Amazon rainforest, obviously it's a massive like swath of land that you're talking about there. And because it's so densely packed with trees, usually or historically, this has been pretty much the biggest absorber of carbon dioxide on the face of the planet. Okay, so losing this as a potential carbon sink is obviously going to have massive consequences. And now, apparently, under Jair Bolsonaro's leadership within Brazil, it is now emitting more carbon dioxide than it is actually absorbing, which is pretty fucking wild. But again, that plays into a lot of the policies that he has had towards the Amazon, completely disregarding indigenous rights, completely disregarding the environment, obviously. But again, I think that's a massively important factor in terms of why people should be aggressively supporting Lula da Silva in this election, even if you happen to disagree with like his economic policies or whatever else that you could disagree with him on. This issue in and of itself could be like world changing in terms of how we're going to actually be able to address climate change moving forward. But they also say that another interesting winner here in these elections was Sergio Moro, the former judge who temporarily jailed Lula da Silva and was Bolsonaro's former justice minister, also defied polls to win his Senate seat. So this guy was involved in basically the car wash scandal, is what it's known as now. And he basically, again, as they point out here, decided to jail Lula da Silva. I think he ended up serving like roughly 19 months, if I'm not mistaken on that, but basically on completely trumped up charges. He was later acquitted, I think, by the Supreme Court within Brazil. And this is actually the reason why we ended up with Jair Bolsonaro in the first place. Okay, so just think about this for a sec. This guy, this judge here, who sent Lula da Silva to jail on trumped up corruption charges that were later acquitted, then went and joined Bolsonaro's administration as a justice minister. Okay, and now he's just won a Senate seat. All right, so think about this. I mean, we have multiple different levels of corruption here that would demonstrate that this guy is not even qualified to be a judge, let alone be in the Senate, but apparently that's who these people decided to put in place in that specific region. Now, we also have some other obvious ongoing tensions between Jair Bolsonaro and the existence of democracy within Brazil. So they touch on this in this article down here. They say, ahead of the October 30th runoff, some fear that the country could slide into political violence. And this has been one of the most violent periods in like modern Brazilian history politically over the last couple of years, with Bolsonaro's rise and now him openly coming out and doubting these election results for the months leading up to this election, basically in the same way that Donald Trump did here in the United States. But they say on the campaign trail, Bolsonaro has repeatedly hinted that he would not accept a Lula victory, raising concerns of a Brazilian version of the riots last year at the United States Capitol after former President Donald Trump insisted that he was the winner of the country's presidential elections. So this was a fear that was ongoing for months. Obviously, with Lula da Silva not outright winning in the first round of this contest, we're going to have basically the next month to see what exactly Jair Bolsonaro wants to do in regards to, maybe even trying to pull off some sort of a coup attempt or, indulging his supporters to go out and commit violence or something like that, or just destabilizing the country generally. So I think that that's an important thing to keep our eyes on here. Now, it also has been kind of interesting because I think that the United States has played a significant role in terms of his ability to potentially pull off some sort of a military coup. And basically, I mean, if the United States, with politicians like Bernie Sanders putting forward that resolution in the Senate to prevent the United States aiding and abetting in any sort of coup attempt that would be led by Jair Bolsonaro, or legitimizing his government if he were to try to pull something off, we have seen, surprisingly, with all of the history that we know, the imperialist involvement of the United States in Latin America, even in Brazil, with helping to back a far-right military dictatorship, which Bolsonaro is very fond of. We kind of have like a weird situation now where it does seem like the United States is either not really going to be participating in some sort of a coup if Bolsonaro wanted to do that, and maybe even going a little bit further than that and slightly putting our thumbs on the scale in order to make sure ensure that if he does end up losing in the second round, that is not actually able to happen. So I mean, if you look throughout history, a far-right fascist candidate like Jair Bolsonaro with the partial backing of the military, this would be like a 10 out of 10 easy dub for the CIA and the U.S. State Department to participate in the overthrowing of democracy, especially considering that his opponent is this somewhat democratic socialist candidate like Lula da Silva. But it just seems like the conditions are not ripe there for the United States to pull something off like that. So it does seem like his ability or his capacity to legitimately pull that off are definitely diminished. But again, that doesn't mean that there can't be violence. That doesn't mean that he's not going to try something. And just to give you guys a little bit of perspective in terms of like who this guy is, right? Because, we talk about all of these far right politicians around the world and stuff. And, sometimes we forget to actually discuss like in detail why they're so bad, why we call them fascists, why people should oppose them. But just to read a little bit in terms of like his openly stated positions on some of the major issues that people in Brazil are concerned about. Here, just directly from his Wikipedia page, a rudimentary rundown. They say, Jair Bolsonaro is known for his strong opposition to left-wing policies. Most notably, he has been a vocal opponent of same-sex marriage, environmental regulations, abortion, affirmative care, particularly racial quotas, immigration, particularly from Haiti, Africa, and the Middle East, which he once called the scum of humanity. He's against drug liberalization, land reforms, and secularism at the federal level, among other things. They say he has also made statements in defense of the Brazilian military regime, a dictatorship known for constant human rights violations. They say he argues that torture is a, quote, legitimate practice, and says that he would try to pass new legislation regarding the introduction of life imprisonment to the Brazilian Penal Code. They say Bolsonaro supports the privatization of state-owned companies and advocates for free market policies, although critics have stated that his policymaking record doesn't necessarily show that he is in favor of economic liberalism. But, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, this guy's vehemently against LGBTQ rights. He's obviously, again, as I just pointed out, against abortion rights. He is very far right when it comes to the social issues, but he's also very far right when it comes to the economic issues, which I think is, a major issue that is, on the top minds of what Brazilian people are actually concerned about, right? So you have somebody like Lula da Silva, who throughout his career as the president and involved generally within Brazilian politics, somebody who was responsible for uplifting literally millions of people, if not tens of millions of people, out of poverty with the successes of a lot of his more left-wing economic policies. Now, also, Lula, again, is dramatically better than Jair Bolsonaro on things like the environment, on social issues, on the rights for indigenous populations within Brazil. And so just on any single issue that you wanted to look at, Lula is obviously the superior candidate. Now, again, we are going to be heading for this runoff, and with the pollsters being as dramatically off as they were in this first round of the elections, both at the presidential level and at those lower level elections, I wouldn't count anything out. So, I mean, this is something where Lula da Silva is basically going to be tasked with building a coalition among a lot of the different parties that had, support from the Brazilian people, and building a coalition that is going to back him, endorse him, and then fight for his presidency. And the question is just who is going to be able to better and more effectively form those coalitions in order to get above the threshold, that 50% that is needed to actually win in this runoff election. So it's definitely going to be a lot closer than maybe we had initially predicted, and maybe that we had initially thought. But at the end of the day, I think that it's still a bright future for Brazil. I definitely think that Lula has a very, very solid chance of pulling this off and winning at the end of the month. So I'll keep you guys updated as we get more information on this. I'll keep you updated if Jair Bolsonaro tries to pull something crazy in the next couple of weeks with his, insane and deranged supporters that are definitely willing to use violence in order to keep him in power. So I'll keep you guys updated as we get more information here. But, it's obviously not as great news as we were anticipating that it could be. But at the same time, it's definitely not anything to be like looking down upon. And the future definitely still could end up with a solid scenario here for who is leading one of the largest economies in the world that has a dramatic impact on a hell of a lot of issues that affect not just the Brazilian people, but the United States, as well as many other countries around the world, and the safety and security and the future habitability of the planet itself.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying